I don't know. Again, I don't know if I want to watch this. I know that there's one key point that ends up in the show that somebody pointed out to me, but I don't know. So I guess, yeah, we'll just watch this.
Ellie Brown. Sorry. Hi, everybody. Well,
I always struggle in my week in review videos for the graphic side of things, so maybe I learned something from this. I usually would skip these kind of SCLs because they just don't interest me. I care about gameplay systems and things like that. That's my interest when it comes to Star Citizen. This is the exact opposite of my interest, but I guess for the sake of education.
welcome to Star Citizen Live, graphics engineering
Graphics
Q&A.
and engineering Q&A.
And if you've never seen Star Citizen Live before, it's where we take about an hour out of our Friday and spend time with our developers, explore a bit of their process, sometimes put them on the hot seat and make them face the questions that come from you, our Star Citizen backer.
I've rarely seen anybody on the hot seat.
Mr. Allie Brown. Let me find there we go. Mr. Allie Brown, Director of Graphics Engineering. Allie, how you doing, man?
Hello, I'm doing good, thank you.
Welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to point out, I want to do this to celebrate Allie, not to throw everybody else out. But Allie actually came to me and asked to do this show. He saw a bunch of the questions that folks had.
That's cool.
After CitizenCon, but the graphics presentation and stuff like this, and he's like, "Hey, I'd like to do a Q&A and talk more to the backers about the stuff." And like I did that thing where my eyes turned into like cartoon, like what? Like the developer came to me and asked me to do a show. So
I have to send a message.
All of us to put our appreciation out there and thank Allie Brown ahead of time for coming to us and asking to do the show. Now, as we usually do, we put up a thread in Spectrum where we collect questions from the backers and let backers vote up the questions that they want to see answered most. We collected those and went through them, and if I were a professional, I would have had them up on my screen before I started the show. Give me just a second. Allie, tell us about your childhood. I'm kidding. Here we go. All right. So right off the bat, Allie, the number one question by a wide margin, I mean, it wasn't even close, had to do with Vulcan. In general, why don't you start, if you can, give us a general status update on Vulcan, where we're at, where we're going, how's it going? What can you tell us?
Okay, so yeah, Vulcan is obviously going to be the back end of our new renderer, which we've called Gen 12. And the Vulcan side of it is going pretty well, but ultimately it's limited by our progress on the Gen 12 renderer. Until that's complete, Vulcan can't be complete. So at the moment, as we've been developing on the Gen 12 renderer, Vulcan's always been playing catch-up, basically. Just as soon as something works in the new renderer, we look at Vulcan, make sure it works, and then bring it back up to speed. So it just lags ever so slightly behind. So in terms of like features for the Vulcan renderer, we're probably about 75%, something like that, of that being completed, but probably slightly less when you start factoring in performance, because Vulcan will perform slightly differently to DirectX we were using in the past. Probably a naive type of first version we run internally might not be quite as fast, but obviously we don't want to ship that to you. We want to ship the faster version. So probably somewhere between 60%, 75%, depending on how much performance work there is. But a lot of that has been done.
Okay.
Like I say, it's playing catch up to Gen 12, and Gen 12 is progressing very well now. And once we it's not far off. And once we finish the Gen 12 aspect, we'll throw a bunch of bodies on the Vulcan side, and that will, I think, very quickly come up. So we're not expecting a big difference between Gen 12 release and then the Vulcan release very soon after.
And this is basically supposed to just improve client performance, right?
Parts of the Gen 12 renderer have gone out in previous patches and even upcoming patches with 3.17. This isn't going to be like a light switch kind of thing where one day there's a patch and suddenly everything looks differently.
No, and
I don't want to pause much. The biggest issue, apparently, with Theaters of War was client performance. Gen 12 render of Vulcan maybe equals Theaters of War, guys. Who knows?
Lovely if we do that, but the type of continuous live release means to
I
do
doubt
that
it.
we would have to both sets of code in parallel for like a whole year, and it's too painful to maintain both when we have constant features we're working on. So as
I
we
do
finish
believe them
something,
on that, yeah.
we leave it in type of an experimental stage for a while, where we internally turn it on for the graphics programmers, and then once we're confident, we turn it on for the rest of the studio, and then the next patch that happens to come out will benefit from that. So we've already, I think at CitizenCon, we already mentioned that all the post effects are already converted. We've been focusing on getting the geometry done, which is the biggest part of the game. At the stage we are today in our stream internal, we have all of the opaque geometry is type of done, which is the vast majority of the game. And then the shadows are coming straight after that. They're basically done, just awaiting some testing. So the big bits that are left actually is just to deal with the transparent geometry, and then a few miscellaneous effects, like, I don't know, the blackout effect and things like that, type of the final piece of polish.
I feel like my performance is more consistent,
largely tackled.
Patch by patch.
Transparency is still a problem. There's plenty of issues there, but the bulk of it is type of making very good progress and won't be too much longer.
So I just wanted to be clear that I want to reiterate again before we move on that this is already coming out and releasing in parts, and sections of it are turning on and stuff like this. So it
feels that way too.
So backers are already seeing the work and results of some aspects of it. They'll see more aspects of it in 3.17. They'll see more aspects of it in 3.18, and then
every release will have more this year.
Yeah.
It'll be faster and faster.
Right. So there will just be a time when it's like, okay, that everything has now been converted over, but again, it won't be like a big boom. Like you logged in on Thursday and the game ran one way, and you logged in on Friday, now the game runs a different way. It's already in progress. It's already happening. It's already releasing. It's little bit after little bit after little bit kind of thing.
Yeah, there's certain parts of it that will be bigger differences than other. But the problem is a PC market, like PC game, everyone's machine is different. So some people will be bound by maybe they've got a really old GPU, maybe they've got a single 4-core system versus an 8-core system. So everyone's going to have different performance characteristics. So there will be some unlucky person somewhere where Gen 12 makes no difference to them, and there'll be someone else who sees their frame rate tripled. It's hard to
fucking
give a
poor Ali Brown. Is that what you're trying to say? The poors can't play
your.
your.
The biggest ones might come towards the end because the focus initially is going to be getting things working, getting things so they don't regress and get worse.
Those poor unlucky poors.
But in terms of actual performance improvements, they'll be able to have, once it's all working, it'll be like, right, pile on, let's see what's actually not working as it should in terms of performance. And then the final switch to Vulkan is probably the biggest change. And that one is going to be a bit of a binary. You either use using Vulkan or you're not. Everything else is going to be more gradual.
Okay. All right. Next up, let's talk about let's see if we can hit some some general.
It is
Gen
unlucky though,
Vulkan
actually, because most people just can't get a GPU, even though they can afford
CPU
one.
parallelization and scene rendering. So I'm just going to read this directly here. Am I correct? This is the person asking. Am I correct to say that when scene rendering is turned on for Gen 12 in Phase 1, that we will get some level of CPU render parallelization?
The fuck does that mean?
Other than the parallelization we already have for visible objects across batch workers and CPU cores, or is the parallelization only coming between Phase 2 and 3, the latter being the optimization of the multi-core scene rendering and bye-bye render thread completely? I'm mainly asking for the sake of high core count, low single clock speed CPU users.
So that's quite a technical question. So each stage will get improvements in that regard for the people that have high core counts, low clock speed.
Poggers.
The parts,
that's what I have.
Of the render are already multi-threaded, and basically the Gen 12 work is moving more and more to them multi-threaded stages, and less work ends up having to be done on the single.
I have a 5950X, so I am very much going to benefit, right?
Which will always remain running on a single core, but in the final version of Vulkan, it will do almost no work, so everything else will be parallelized. But yeah, it will be every single milestone will give benefits. So every release we expect from now till the job's 100% finished, you'll get an improvement.
While we're hitting you with the big ones, let's just get some of the big ones out of the way here. Will the game always be so CPU intensive, or will it move to a GPU intensive scenario at some point?
So,
I mean, wouldn't you want it to be balanced?
To remove a large chunk of the CPU work, so that will naturally mean it's more GPU bound. But even if there was no CPU cost from the graphics team, from my department, the rest of the game is still big and complicated. You know, it's a very ambitious game. So there's lots of work by all the other teams to reduce the CPU load. And yeah, I mean, the engine team and the game team, it's an ongoing thing. That it's constant work to improve the performance. Massive strides have been made, but at the same time, the game's growing. So you see, you know, what might be minor improvements, but actually, if we hadn't been adding features, you would have been probably getting a much faster frame rate. But you know, the game has to be completed. So, yeah, I'd imagine there will always be a relatively intense CPU work on this game compared to a much more simple platformer or something. But yeah,
my
we
GPU
want to
barely
move into a
does
position where
anything.
we're GPU bound from our team. That's what we want, and then we're type of the limiting factor, and then we can we can push the GPU effects hard.
When I was able to get a 5950X, I built my machine and I put a 1070 in it because that's the only graphics card I had and I couldn't get one. And I saw very little jump in performance in Star Citizen when I sat in line for 14 hours for my 3090. And in comparison to jumping from a 4770K to the 5950X.
Harder then for the people that have GPUs that can handle it, and then we can scale it back and give people a good frame rate that don't have such powerful GPUs. So yeah, I think so. I think we will move to be more GPU intensive, but we have to be realistic that it's a complicated game. They'll always have a decent amount of CPU load.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's an interesting challenge because we are running a live environment in the middle of
Here we go.
our attempt to make the game. So it's you build the universe out as it is, and then you do something that makes it less CPU intensive and puts more in the GPU.
I'm
and it's
falling
great,
asleep.
but we don't just stay there. We then add more to the game, more features to the game, more places to the game, more things that end up being CPU intensive. And then you have to work
features,
to bring that new
economy,
stuff over
Jared?
the CPU.
What features?
And then somebody comes in and adds more stuff to the game, which adds more CPU stuff. And then it's like, okay, let's see what we can do to move that, on there. So it's this constant, never-ending challenge of development here. Because even after the day when we go live and we say 1.0 and stuff, development of Star Citizen doesn't stop. We keep moving, we keep adding more planets, we keep adding more systems. I mean, this train doesn't stop. So it is going to be a forever challenge.
The train hasn't left the fucking station yet, dude.
And all the teams, all the performance teams, to just constantly not just optimize for what is there today, but to continuously, improve on everything else that comes tomorrow.
I would hope eventually it becomes slightly easier. The initial,
It drives me nuts because they keep trying to just explain that this is an MMO. Like, you play WoW for 15 years. Like, that's what they're trying to say. But the issue is you can actually play WoW for 15 years, and anybody who plays this consistently is kind of just enjoying the game with a few friends or enjoying the environments with a few friends, and there isn't, like, progress to make, no game, things like that. It's just such a weird explanation.
Building a lot of core technology. As we get further along, you'd hope there wouldn't be so much core type of foundation, or like building the structures that allow us to build the universe. It'll be more, hopefully, game features, iterating on the fun, adding more like mechanics, which should hopefully not be as intensive. You're either mining or you're hacking, you're either shooting or you're, whatever the other mechanics are. They hopefully won't pile up forever. That's maybe different to the GPU side. We'll constantly add visual effects, for whatever machines can handle, we'll add it. But hopefully on the game side, which is where we've struggled with CPU speed, that will ease slightly. But the game's going to always be growing, and if the CPUs can handle it, there will be no reason not to add more complexity.
I think it's safe to say it's in our DNA. We're going to push this stuff as far as it goes, and we're going to keep pushing it. So there's not likely to ever be just open overhead. We're going to keep pushing. That's in our DNA here. Let's see. Next question here. When Vulkan
to the point where
does get
nothing
implemented,
works,
are you expected to look further into mesh shader pipeline and the benefits within?
Mesh shaders are something that certainly interest me greatly, that we would really love to look at. One thing we maybe have to temper that with is that the adoption rate currently isn't huge among the market for this new technology. I think rough numbers, maybe 30% or something of our player base. But that's obviously going to grow over time, and we also have to take in, by the time you actually make the technology, that the adoption rate would increase by the time you release it. But still, we have to be careful in what we use it for. Like, if we made the use of these new mesh shaders, which is a new way of type of building and rendering geometry, if that was our core only method of rendering geometry, we would lose half our player base, and that would be a huge storm. So we have to be wary that that's not a possibility. Now, you can use it for optimizations, which is one of the main benefits, but also then you're benefiting an optimization to the highest power GPUs that may not actually need it that much. So it's a difficult question. The ideal use is something that can type of improve the visuals, that then the people with the greater power GPUs, with the more modern GPUs, get to see these new visuals, but somehow doesn't impact the experience of the slightly less powerful GPUs to still play the game.
The ports.
We really don't want to cut people off. There's not so much, and I don't want to be interpreted as holding back. It's more bang for buck. If we're not doing mesh shaders, we're doing something else. We're doing some of the benefits as many people as we can. But at some point, the tide will turn, and the benefits will be clearer by using mesh shaders than they will by focusing elsewhere. So it's definitely something that's very interesting for us. And there's a few areas we've been discussing that we would like to use them potentially. But yeah, Gen 12 is the focus. So that's on ice until Gen 12 is shipped.
Okay. This may be a little outside your wheelhouse, but we'll try it and we'll see what we get. Has there been any internal testing of Linux using Vulkan? This person's using Vulkan to backdoor a question about Linux basically.
Yeah.
So
well, I'll preface it with I generally don't have much involvement with Linux. That'd be more engine team and that stuff. But I do know aspects. And so in the graphics team internally, I don't run Linux, and I think most of our guys don't run Linux for the game. However, and Gen 12 is our focus and Windows support. However, I know some of our employees have played the game and frequently play it via, I'm told, Lutris and Proton are the libraries they use on Linux, and that they get reasonable performance already. Now, switching to Vulkan will make that existing method of running Linux much faster, and should, theoretically give you comparable or even better performance on Linux. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that's
what's
the only
so great
way
about
I'm not
Linux.
sure
I don't
if
get
there's
it.
going to be a native client. That's the question for somebody else, for engine team or CR. But I'm told there was a way, and that way is going to get faster with Linux, but we haven't tested it ourselves yet. Linux the Vulkan support isn't at a point where you could directly compare.
It seems just like a more complicated way of doing things.
So it'd be a bit unfair to compare. Like, it might even run faster, but you'd be missing parts of the game.
Fad.
So until
It's
we've got
better.
Vulkan finished, is only the point we'll be able to do a fair comparison. And I'll probably just slip in there just because people ask. I'm told, and again, this is not my
It's
area,
not controlled by a company. Well, that's good.
An
Sure.
issue with Vulkan at the moment with easy anti-cheat, which I believe Epic are looking into, and there was SDKs being released in the coming months, and when they are released, we'll be integrating them to try and resolve that issue. But again, outside my sphere of knowledge, I'm just dumping information. I knew there would be Linux questions, so
You can customize it, no fluff.
it's one of those. I saw it and I'm like, this is like a 1980s sitcom backdoor.
I feel like
question
Windows
where
is like Apple,
they're trying
where
to use
just
the topic of one thing to backdoor a subject on another.
everybody knows how to use it. It's simple.
I every once in a while. Let's move into some. We got some questions here that are mostly about keeping visuals up to date. One of the ongoing concerns, because our game has been in development for a while, and because we've been running a live environment during that development since 2013, when the Hangar module came out. Lots of questions have to do with how you're going to keep things up to date. So with the dev cycle being so long for Star Citizen, how do you deal with the ever-changing graphics tech and rework and still keep moving forward?
So I think every AAA studio with its own engine has the same challenge, really, of keeping up to date. They constantly have to make new post effects as new technology or new ideas come about in the industry. So that's not massively different to us to any other type of, I don't want to name them, but I'm sure you'll know of the ones that aren't part of massive, using big engines or have multiple studio publishers. But yeah, I don't see that being massively different. We only have a couple of differences internally, and one is we can't wipe the slate clean every couple of years when we release a game, or however frequent a big studio might. So we can't say, well, that was good. We did mostly good, but we didn't like that technology. So next time we do a different one. We have to build that while we're while we're running. We have to build the next version of whatever it is. So that does introduce some complexities, but overall, it's not, especially for the graphics team, it's not been a problem for us. Most things are straight
They don't
replacements.
suffer,
You
we
replace
do.
the old bloom effect with a new bloom effect. You replace the old shader with a new shader. It's not a major problem, and I've been in a very quick dev cycle on a previous company, and it's not that much different. I don't find a major challenge. The one point that I would say is different, though, is the art pipeline and the artwork we have. So we have to maintain everything.
We didn't
that's been
sign up
built.
to suffer for
We can't
this
say,
long.
"Oh, we've done this new
Nobody did.
technology, but
Not
these
back
5
then.
spaceships don't work anymore." That's just not an option. So everything we make has to remain backwards compatible. And what we tend to do is, say for the art pipeline, we make a new shader that can do, I don't know, like the tint system for the spaceship, so we can more easily roll out new skins. It may not work on an old spaceship, but that system won't work on an old spaceship. We'll ship 2 versions of the shader, the new one and
Okay,
the old
it's
one. And
Pappy
then
Lou.
somebody, when they get the chance, will go,
I don't normally do this when doing reacts, but I'm going to. Why is he talking about releasing a game when he has no idea how to do that? LOLOL. You're so funny. You're so hilarious. What does this guy have to do with releasing the game? What does this guy have to do with releasing a game? This guy's job is literally to consistently update the graphics for the game. He's got nothing to do with how it releases, dude. Have you, like, is your brain so smooth that the only thing you can hear is release a game? Oh my god! Time to make a joke!
go back to that ship, assign the new shader, maybe fix up anything that needs fixing up, and then we're good again. But we can't demand that they work at the same frequencies as us. So we'll do the new technology, and they will opt into it when they get round to it. Which might be the next week, it might be a few months, but eventually these things. And once we get close to type of 80% adoption, we'd have to poke people with a stick to try and get over the hurdle so we can delete the old technology. And that's constantly happening. We have lots of different technologies that are type of in progress have type of been rolled out across the assets. So that's the biggest issue, but it's not really a technology issue. It's more of a data management issue with the size of the content of the game, which is very huge. I don't even know how many spaceships we have now, but it's big numbers
It's a
now.
lot. It's a lot. No, it's an issue that people who have played other MMOs, at least the MMOs that have survived for a while, see. It's just even World of Warcraft or Star Wars: Old Republic or Star Trek Online. I'm trying to think of the sci-fi ones that are out there. They're constantly making updates, replacing shaders and stuff like this. They don't throw out their engine and start with another engine. It is constantly adding and upgrading and just swapping parts out. Eventually you start getting into the ship of Theseus conversation, where if you replaced every part at some point, is it still the original one? And that's a question for video game philosophers, not for dummies like me who just talk on the video. Let's move to another one. Here's an interesting follow-up. Will Star Citizen graphics get outdated or surpassed by other engines like Unreal 5? Lots of chat about Unreal 5 in the chat, because that's the current hotness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar question to the previous one in a regard that every developer.
No, I'm texting my mom.
Or any
they're thinking about coming down and
question, and it's not really that different, to be honest, than the last 10, 15 years. Maybe since say Unreal 3 came around, when we started to see these big engines, and also the publishers that have been joining more devs together. So I don't think it's anything new. Obviously, always there was going to be the big new shiny thing, and some company, not always the Unreals, but sometimes it'll be the other devs, will come up with the new shiny thing, and everyone will learn from that, and they'll trial it, and that will look at the success or failure of that engine, that game, and see if that technology survives the test of time. And if it does, other studios will naturally, make their own version of that and absorb it into their pipeline. So you have this. I think that's just the natural ebb and flow of the industry. Somebody will push ahead in one area, the other people.
Way
will
to avoid the
catch
question.
up.
They're not
It's
going to
continuous. I don't
switch
think it's
engines.
always one
What
engine,
fucking?
though.
What is wrong with people?
There is things that the larger companies can push much harder on, which, like I said,
Let's
the
just
tooling,
switch the engine.
because they are selling a product to use their engine, and for people that maybe are not even professional game devs sometimes, so they have to make the tooling very powerful and easy to use. it's less of a focus when you have professional devs that are very used to the engine. So yeah, it's something. I'm not going to pretend that we don't look at, say, the latest UE5 technology and say that's pretty good. There's some really impressive stuff there.
Yeah,
The nanite
and
in
let's
particular
steal
is
it.
very
Like,
interesting.
that's probably what
But
they're thinking
yeah,
about. What
I'm
works,
not
what doesn't,
particularly
and they're
worried
going
as
to
long as we
steal what
continue to
works. And
develop our engine, as long as we continue to maintain and grow a graphics team and keep up with the latest technology. Yeah, we will be there. Yeah, it just doesn't mean that the day after Unreal implement nanite, we're going to implement nanite. And there is sometimes, obviously, when the latest thing comes out, there is always this, and we're not talking about nanite here specifically, just in general, but the assumption that that solves all of life's problems, and then you wait 6 months or a year and you find out that it solves a subset of problems. It's not, it's not the solution to everything. There is many aspects to a full package, a full engine like we've got all Unreal.
So as long as we continue to maintain the engine and grow the graphics team and everything, we should have no issue keeping up with the cutting edge.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, our visuals are still cutting edge now. There's areas of the engine that we are extremely proud of that will match or surpass other engines, and there's areas that are not as good that we need to improve. So I don't see a major issue there. And for example, they picked Unreal, so I'll talk about that. But the nanite tech it improves the type of quality of geometry. That's super powerful in some areas. It's a benefit everywhere, but the main thing is type of natural geometry. So for planets and things like this, that could be a great benefit. But it doesn't do as much for some other types of geometry, internal spaces. And I think our quality on our type of interiors has been extremely high for a number of years and matches any other game I see. So it's not that we don't want much better, natural geometry, but yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, but I'm not worried. Yeah, as long as we, maintain the development, maintain the team, as long as we don't get fired tomorrow, we're all good.
Right.
I
One
like
more
that
question
answer.
on the topic. It's kind of a follow up here. I'm glad you said the maintaining and everything, because that's literally this question. The game and its engine has already allowed the graphics to evolve massively compared to the original Kickstarter days. But can this be maintained to keep up with modern titles? Does the engine have a limit? Is there going to be a point where we can't improve?
So I don't think so. It's almost the opposite.
As long as you keep
an engine
updating.
isn't a single thing, obviously, that has a limit. You hit it and then you stagnate or you type of replace it. It's many, many different subsystems and subsystems of the subsystems. And these, like I mentioned before, are being constantly iterated or replaced. And that's not a
Well, it's
problem.
at its
That's not
limit
wasted.
until
That's
you
just the
replace
natural
things,
evolution of
right?
software. But in terms of where can we maintain it, I think it's the opposite. I think we're accelerating quite quickly. I think the initial years was finding out, say for the graphics team, is finding our feet. We obviously inherited a code base and learning that, and then brought more people on board to type of better understand and start to develop that code base. And more recently on the graphics side, we obviously replaced the renderer, so now it is 100% hours and 100% hour understanding of every nook and cranny of it. And then once that's done, what type of our rate is going to be much greater, be able to keep up with new technology, and that's the big motivator for Gen 12. And the performance was one, but the secondary one was to be able to adapt to new technology and create new new features much more quickly. So yeah, I think actually, again, as assuming the team stays the same or grows in size, we've got plenty of capacity now to develop things much quicker than we have done in the past. And we need to, obviously, because to keep up with the big engines. But yeah, I'm not concerned in that way. I think we're going to be pushing a lot more visuals in the coming years.
Chat is
anybody
having
that's
a
concerned
bit of a
about
row
visuals.
about the difference between Gen 12 renderer and DX12. Are we doing DX12? Are we not doing DX12? What's the difference here?
There's no immediate reason for the DX12. We picked the Gen 12 name. Well, we started planning this renderer long before we'd necessarily settled 100% on Vulkan, and we just had to pick something. So DX12 type of has a numbering system. At the time, Vulkan and the other APIs didn't have a numbering, so it's like 12. Everyone understood what DX12 was in the industry, so we went with something that had the number 12 in it. It helps pin down to this piece of tech, and then the next one, if you call it the new renderer, then you're going to have the new renderer and the better renderer. So it's called Gen 12. But in the end, we decided the Vulkan was the better choice for us because of the Linux aspect and a few other technology points of view, type of made it slightly better for us. But it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't, we could have gone DX12. But at the moment, there's no pressing reason for us to implement DX12. We could. It wouldn't be a huge effort. Put a couple of guys on it for some number of months, and you would eventually pop that out. But unless we have a reason to believe there was some new technology on DX12 or some platform or something that required that, there is no reason for us to really go there at the moment. So for now, no plans for DirectX 12. But the engine is set up in a way that we very much could implement another API if we needed to. If the successor to Vulkan comes along, or DX13 is the thing that we need to make the world better, then we will do that.
Fair enough. All right, let's move more into like life in the game and how this stuff actually like manifests and stuff for players in the game. Right off the bat, will we have more refined graphics settings soon? Currently, our options are very limited and somewhat confusing.
Yeah, I have to admit we've not spent a great deal of effort there, as you'll probably see from the comment, but we've type of been holding off for a while because we were mostly CPU bound. Then graphics options are generally to type of squeeze out performance. Generally, we generally run at the highest quality most time, and it's only to scale back. And mostly we've not been GPU bound, so there wasn't a huge motivation for scaling the engine back. All the focus has been getting the CPU cost down, which is what the servers need, it's what the clients need. So that's been the focus. And then implementing Gen 12 changes the way the lot of the renderer works, so it would change the way we'd expose the options. So we're going to get Gen 12 done, and then we're going to have a fresh look at these options. They will probably have quite a radical change. We're going to simplify them a lot, but then also we'll have an advanced section that will be much more complicated than we have now. But at the moment, I think there's 4 different quality settings, but we're going to maybe change that up, maybe reduce that a bit. But then the memory management is something we're probably going to push much further. We're definitely going to have a whole bunch of new options and make sure that the options we have give you some meaningful change. Some of the settings we have there, you can change things to high or low, reduce draw distance or increase them, but you'll find that the frame rate doesn't really change, and it's a pointless setting. So why have it? So we're going to set them based on what it needs to change the frame rate by a certain fraction. So high might be 20% slower than medium, and low might be 20% faster. Well, that would be the motivation. And if it doesn't change the performance, we won't expose it.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, while we're in the graphics settings options here, would it be possible to add a windowed borderless mode to the graphics setting? Vastly improves the quality of life for multi-monitor users, which is a fairly substantial part of the player base.
So we already support a borderless windowed mode, but I'm going to gather, because they've talked about multi-monitor, they're probably meaning that I think it centers onto your main monitor at the moment, and it locks the resolution of your center monitor, so you can't drag that out to span 2 or 3 monitors and customize the resolution. If you've got 3 4K monitors, maybe you don't want to run at 12K unless you've got a monster GPU. So yes, definitely, it's a bit of an embarrassment. We haven't quite got to that yet. That's definitely something that's very high on our priority list to fix this stream as soon as Gen 12 is done. So resolution scaling and then picking you.
I think that's like one of the most telling, like, cool things that he answered. It's a bit of an embarrassment that we didn't get to that. I'm sorry, but right now we're just focused. Like, everybody is focused on getting the Gen 12 renderer out. Sorry, man. That's actually embarrassing. Like, that's refreshing to hear.
Yeah, borderless. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
we're so sorry that multi-monitor and widescreen is not working. It's embarrassing. It happens every patch.
Internally,
but we're focused on
we already have the resolution scaling, which is one aspect of it that people have been asking for as well. But that doesn't quite work with our UI yet, so there's just a few bugs there. And then the changing of the size of it shouldn't be a complicated issue. I can't give an exact time frame, but it definitely will be. We'll be looking at that.
I mean, that's why they don't do it.
Soon.
I tend to play almost everything in windowed borderless because I need to switch over to Teams or email or something on another monitor very easily. Because just in the middle of the day, CR will ping me or something. I always have to keep an eye on the left screen while I'm playing on the middle. So Windows borderless makes that experience a lot easier for me.
There can be some quite
Jared, you're moving to the UK.
And the full screen borderless and the exclusive full screen.
Stop playing random Star Wars
lots of factors,
game.
but there is changes in performance potentially. Depending on your system, either could be faster, and there's also changes in the latency as well. Generally, full screen exclusive is
pack your bags, buddy.
But a pain when you're getting messaged by someone, and Discord or something, and you want to alt tab out.
Well, I don't ever worry about latency. I suck at any latency, so it doesn't matter. It's a couple fractions of a second isn't the difference between me being good and not. I'm just bad.
I feel your pain.
Are there any plans to let us turn off temporal AA or get rid of the ghosting that it brings?
That's a thorny one. I
got halfway through it and I was like,
yeah. So temporal AA anti-aliasing is one form of what we call like a temporal accumulation system. It uses data from a previous frame to basically just make things cheaper. It opens the door to a whole host of new technologies. Now, anti-aliasing is one of them and the most obvious, but it actually is a major way we can reduce noise in all of our rendering. And also it can help you introduce blending effects. You can blend between two things. Like, for example, currently our planet terrain uses the temporal blending to blend between all the different ground textures. So in terms of turning off temporal A, if you turn it off, then you don't just turn off anti-aliasing, you turn off all the temporal blending system, so you'll get noisy shadows, noisy occlusion, no blending on the terrain. So yeah, it's not quite as simple as turning it off. This is an unfortunate reality of modern rendering, and you'll find that in many engines, like at 70-80% of them, it is that case because it gives you so much performance. It lets you spend it on everything else, and usually it's only a type of quite bespoke, quite narrower focused games that can afford to not
can't
use
reduce
it
the noisy community
bandwidth on a different form of AA that's usually more expensive, like MSAA or something like that. So unfortunately, probably a hard off at the moment is not possible. We can potentially expose the option, but it would probably have to come out, if we did that, with a massive warning that what you're about to do is going to break the visuals. What I don't want to see is the graphics program is seeing pictures of our game looking awful and broken, right, and people posting, look how bad this game looks. So but maybe there's a halfway house. Maybe we can, maybe there's decrease the strength of it, but with a warning that some effects will become more noisy as a result of that. So you'd think that it's just going to make the image crisper or type of sharper, but actually you'll be degrading it in other ways. So maybe not a hard off, but there might be some flexibility in there. We can have a look at that when we look at the graphics options to see if there's something that makes sense. It's a tricky one, though. It's an unfortunate reality. Nobody likes temporal AA in the company. Like, no, especially UI people hate it because of the potential mess it can cause. You'll find everyone from VFX hates it because it type of smudges out their particle effect. It's not a nice thing. Nobody appreciates the technology, but it's amazing in what it can do. It is vastly superior to the alternative. So it's tricky. But maybe some people just want the image sharper, so having like sharpening controls or tweaking that is okay. But the ghosting it specifically, which this person mentioned, is tricky because that is a product of using the data from the previous frame in an area of the screen where you don't have data from the previous frame. So if you turn the camera quickly or somebody runs in front of you, you don't know what was there previously, so you have to make it up. And basically, what you're seeing when there's the ghosting is sometimes actually the lack of temporal data. So that's type of a clue as to what you might get if you didn't have temporal area. So yeah, thorny issue. We'll I can look.
It's just to move very slowly.
Yeah. We'll see what we can do. See if there's something that can type of, when we look at the graphics options, it can type of help.
I don't know what just happened, but basically they said this thing that looks like shit. We don't care because we need the performance.
This person enabled auto HDR on Windows 11 and says it looks extremely good. Can we expect native HDR in the future? Did I say HDR the first time, or did I say something else? They enabled auto HDR in Windows 11. It looks good. Can we expect native HDR in the future?
Yes, absolutely. So we already support HDR through most of the pipeline. All the rendering is HDR. Unfortunately, there was two things we were left to do to complete that. One is our color processing. So generally, what happens is you produce your image in high dynamic range, and then you crunch it down to a low dynamic range, which is the bit HDR needs to modify. But then we then color correct it, just like you would in a film. You adapt the colors, you try and produce a mood, and that process is built in low dynamic range.
It would make more stuff look bad. True.
It's not, and it's an artistic process. We can't just turn it into HDR. It needs to go back to art. We need to type of review how they would like to do this color correction in HDR. It's a reasonably known problem. Other studios have tackled it. But that's just the piece we haven't got to. And then there is a minor bit of work into like making sure that it works in all the different types of HDR. There is so many different formats and so many different brightness screens and monitors that you have to do a bit of careful Q&A to make sure that you actually get good results. There's no point just testing on my fancy HDR screen and then having an actual consumer one not actually look good. So yeah, there's two little bits to finish it off, and the continuing theme here is after Gen 12, we really just want to get Gen 12 done. But yeah, that's quite high on the list. It initially was not as important because HDR monitors were relatively rare for the PC market compared
I think
to
I have HDR
consoles,
on my
which play on a
monitor.
TV, which tends to support HDR. But it's definitely become a lot more popular now.
Yeah. Let's see. While we're on graphics settings, we got a nice little collection of graphics settings questions here. Will you add an option to turn camera-based motion blur off, but keep object-based motion blur on?
Let me look it up.
Yes. And I'm slightly ashamed that we don't already expose that.
No, sorry.
Yeah. I know that our Digital Foundry friends have pushed hard for that, and yeah. Clearly, camera motion blur is contentious to say the least. Object motion blur has some public backing, far more than the camera motion blur, which is notoriously hated by a lot of people. Good for cinematics, great for cinematics, makes it amazing.
It's wonderful for cinematics.
Yeah, it is HDR.
Yeah, while you're in the fast-paced action, it's controversial. Yeah, and I think there is a slider. I can't remember what's exposed at the moment. We have the ability to tone it down, but yeah, most people were just like off. I don't want that part of it. It doesn't add anything. But things like character animations and gun reloads and stuff can look a lot better with some object motion blur if it's at the right level, not too in your face.
I don't know.
The other option
is we just optimize the game till it runs at 240 frames a second, and then UI does it for you.
It's the GL8, the LG GL850B.
The human eye can't see more than 60 frames a second. I'm just kidding.
Right, true.
I'm just kidding.
We don't have a frame rate.
why do I poke the bear sometimes? I don't know. I have impulse control problems. As players consider GPU purchases, should they expect VRAM usage to keep increasing as the game is developed?
How could you consider GPU purchases?
So we've had to be quite careful in the past with the amount of video memory use. We have,
I don't think it's like high level HDR.
Don't have quite so powerful GPUs, so they don't hold us back. We just try and make sure that we don't rule them out of the game. So we've been quite smart in how we've used the memory, and we make sure that they're still able to run the game. Obviously, the performance will be not as good on their machines. So yeah, I think with 3 to 4 gigs, you can run the game quite comfortably and get decent
32-inch GL8.
So, and I think type of the 4 gig region
GL850B
will stay running the game quite nicely for quite some time. I don't think there's a technology reason why the minimum needs to increase, but what will happen is we have all these different pools.
I'm turning on the monitor.
Textures, how much used for geometry and so on. And the type of the core amount of memory you need to run everything without textures and without meshes is increasing over time. And eventually, out of your 4 gigs, if we end up with 3 gigs to do the bare basics, then your 1 gig left won't give you a lot of textures and a lot of geometry. You'll still be able to run the game, but eventually, yeah, you'll start getting diminishing returns eventually. And there's elements of that already. Like when we added planets and gas clouds, these things all took up memory. So I think gas clouds, our budget is like 300 megs, 400 megs or something. So that has to come from somewhere. And if your machine doesn't have it, you're getting less of something to pay for that. Now, one thing we are going to do is with Gen 12, as a necessity of the way Vulkan works, the memory management is much more explicit. Basically, rather than DirectX or AMD or NVIDIA or Intel managing the memory for you, it's left largely to yourself as a developer. But as a result of that, we are much more strict with how we use the memory. And what we're going to do is what a few other games have done is type of expose that to you in the advanced graphics options, so you can see exactly what memory you're using and type of balance that as you see fit. So if you want more texture memory and then you will sacrifice something else, then that's your choice. And you can type of see how we're adapting rather than it being hidden from you, which slightly is at the moment.
I don't know what I did.
The other thing that a lot of people maybe don't realize is resolution you run the game has a huge impact on the amount of memory. So when I'm saying like 4 gigs is okay, if you're trying to run the game, 8K or 4K widescreen or something, you are taking a huge amount of memory for the bare bones, just getting the screen rendered without any geometry or textures in there. So you leave very little room for them. So if we expose it to you and show it to you, it'll be much more clear, and people that don't have as much memory will be able to make a smarter decision on how they want to use it, if they're interested. Obviously, we'll have automatic settings, do our best job. But yeah, should you want to delve into that. So to answer the question, yes, VRAM usage will steadily increase, but I don't think our minimum will increase for a while. I think it will be quite stable for quite some time. Especially at the 4 gig region is going to be okay. But yeah, we definitely want to be able to push to the 8, type of, and more eventually as and we need to, because for example, the consoles have more memory than 4 gigabytes significantly. So, and we need to be beating them. So yeah, we need to use it, but we just need to keep something in reserve for the 4 gig people.
All right, so let's move out of the graphics options and into the graphics as people experience them in the games here, what they actually see on their screens. Right off the bat here, how are you planning on handling the graphical toll as players enter a system when multiple space stations, millions of objects, thousands of players all in one location? Because currently Xenothreat can sometimes cause a rather nifty PowerPoint presentation.
Thousands of players in one location. Are they still talking this shit, dude?
For people. Sometimes even when there's like less than 30 hanging around.
So
Jared's looking very intently at this one.
Usually, I mean,
like, don't tell them. Don't tell them it's not a reality, Ali.
I mean, we'd have to profile each case, but when we've looked at things like Xenothreat, it's nearly always a CPU cost. And generally, if say in a space battle like Xenothreat, in terms of polygon count, it can't be that high when you're in space. Like, there was a limit to what you could see on screen. Even if half the screen is filled with space, that gives you an enormous amount of budget to spend on the bits that aren't space. So yeah, we do have some things like gas clouds which are more expensive in space, but otherwise it's not usually a GPU concern in space, it's a CPU. Now to beat the same drum again, Gen 12 is one of the major parts of the solution for CPU performance, but it's not the only part. And when it comes to Xenothreat, that will be the game code. There will be a lot happening there. There'll be a lot of lasers firing, a lot of AI, there'll be a lot of all sorts of things happening. The optimization there is largely going to come from the game teams, I think. But obviously, us removing as much as we can from the rendering side of it, from the graphics, the CPU cost of that will free up more time for them. But ultimately, I think we'll get to a point where we'll get better, but then it'll be onto their teams to type of then take the mantle and type of push it further. Yeah, I think we can handle it from the graphic side. We will, as we do Gen 12, we'll definitely improve how easily we can handle it, but then the game team, the engine team will have to continue to optimize.
Like, this isn't on the graphics team necessarily.
Work being done on that side.
It's a good chance to remind folks that I was reading the question from the backer. So, when the backer is the one who said thousands of players all in one location.
Oh,
that is
okay.
not your opportunity to run to Reddit and say, Disco said there'll be thousands of people in one location. I was reading the question from the backer. Okay? That's the pact between you and me.
Me and you? No.
No. I'm talking to the people who are watching that stuff. No Reddit thread about how Jared said there were going to be 10,000 people in one place. That's not what I said. I read the question as the backer wrote it. Hold on. I gotta. Give me a second, Allie. I gotta do this. I gotta make sure people understand.
Should he correct the backer
right.
there? I wonder. I don't think he can.
And because you guys did so good, because we have this pact, I'm going to ask the question you guys have been waiting for. Will there ever be practical night vision that players can use?
Well, much in the same vein where you don't want to promise thousands of players to the backers, I can't promise game design issues.
Yeah.
So I think those various game designers are interested in it, but I will not speak on their behalf. But what I can do is talk about night vision implementations and how it's done, and leave it to the design as to what that means in Star Citizen. So in terms of night vision, almost every game up until the last couple of years has done the same thing, which is make the screen go a bit green, change the colors a little bit, brighten it up a little bit, and job done. There's your night vision. So that's fine. We can do that, no problem. But recently we've started to see people going a little bit further. And I don't know if anyone's played the Call of Duty Modern Warfare, but they did a significantly better implementation. It's worth looking up, but they really pushed the boat out a little bit further and tried to emulate exactly what night vision does, or a particular model of night vision.
They do the spectral stuff, right?
Yeah, so now they type of better approximate what each color looks like when looked at under infrared. The infrared color, so they type of convert the colors that you would see, or that an artist says this is going to be a red can. They do the maths and figure out what that actually looks like under infrared camera. And the other thing they do is for things that have particularly non-standard type of unexpected type of brightness in infrared, like a reflector or an infrared light or whatever. There's certain materials that will reflect very brightly. The artists have marked this up, so they have this data to give you the much more convincing visual. So yeah, that's definitely in the vein we'd want. The one thing we have to be careful of is the amount of artwork we have means we can't just go and ask the artist to go and flag up every single material they've ever looked at. But we do already have various markup on materials so that we know the rough surfaces, the types of thing they're made of. So we can retrospectively type say, oh, all the ones that were made of metal, this is how they should respond. All the ones that are made of reflective strips, they respond like this. So there should be scope to do something like that.
Okay.
And that's definitely what I aspire to.
I think with
we're not doing that right now. And
how dark
design say
the
today
dark
is the day
sides
you make the night
of
vision
planets
mode,
and moons are,
that's the day I can talk more freely about it. But yeah, it'd definitely be an interesting thing I'd love to explore.
It's necessary
Right, so,
in some way.
What I'll tell backers right now is the next time we have the opportunity to talk to Todd Pappy, we'll squeeze that question in there, and see what he has to say.
Okay. Because they've actually increasingally
what
gotten
are the technical
darker,
limitations
I feel like.
on the cloud volumes introducing noise when being viewed from a near horizontal angle? I did read that right?
Yeah,
I read that right.
that sounds right. Yeah. So the cloud technology is something our engine director has been pioneering for some time. So
They said noise
I want to
again.
be careful what I say, I don't want to speak on his behalf. Many of the other things we've talked about have been my remit, but this is definitely his baby. But I do know a bit about how it's implemented, so I can speak a little bit on it. So the clouds are built from there's many different stages that go into that process to build the clouds. And each of them, I can't remember, say 5 or 6 different stages. Each of them has been R&D'd into multiple different alternative solutions for them, and we're constantly finding new ways and improved ways to replace each section. And the noise in particular, particularly at the
Smoke fan.
horizontal angle we
What's
mentioned, is because the way that clouds work in our engine and most of us is you have an imaginary ray that fires through into the distance, and you sample, or you take samples along that point, along that ray. So say I take 50 samples between here and the horizon, and I ask, I run some calculation to decide how much cloud cover there is at each of these points. And then I add them all up, and I eventually come up with the final contribution of clouds. But if you imagine if you're looking from orbit straight down, or from the ground straight up, the amount of cloud cover you see versus looking horizontally is hugely different.
We haven't gotten to the one
100
thing
kilometers of clouds versus 1 kilometer if you look straight up.
that I was expecting
when you're running,
to
say, 50 samples
see.
over 100 kilometers,
How
there is
far are
a
we? We're
huge
almost
amount of
done.
error, and that would show
20
us
minutes left?
type of a stepping blocky artifact. But so you don't see blockiness and stepping, we randomize where we sample that ray, so it turns into noise. So we get into R&D solutions that will vastly improve that. There's already many mechanisms to try and minimize that, but one thing that's showing very good promise is we do an initial render basically of the clouds at low resolution. I think it's 1/4 or an 1/8 resolution. Try and identify where the cloud is, like where is the noisy parts, where is the most of the detail, and then when it comes to do the main tracing of the clouds, we put all the rays and the samples where we need them. So we'd adapt to say, oh, this part of the scene is there's a fringe here, and it's like a silver lining on the cloud. That looks really nice, but it's noisy. So we'll fire, many more samples there. And this next part of the screen of a big foggy nothing's happening. No point spending all of our GPU on that. So we cut back on that point. So it type of optimizes it at the same time as improving the quality on different areas of the screen. So that's looking promising, like I say. But because it's the engine team managing that, when we're talking about releases and stuff, but there is definite improvements.
Some of these headsets that these devs have, man, LOL.
And it's going to continue to
Bro,
to it
he sounds better on the microphone than you do on Discord. What are you shaming this guy for? You sound terrible on Discord. This dude, every time he pops in Discord, he's clipping nonstop, sounds like a total dummy, and he's ripping on this guy's headset that sounds better than half the streamers that you watch microphones. It's better than a Blue Yeti. Banging around, making noise, pop, pop.
Let's see. We've only got 8 minutes, but I think we can squeeze some more in. Maybe we can go a little bit over the time here. Does RTX get the team any closer to figuring out a solution to the lack of reflective surfaces or mirrors in the game?
Had to come up, didn't it? So we have plenty of
like
shiny surfaces in the game, but I gather they mean like mirror, like full-on mirror reflection, like really clean. So yes, I know. For true mirror-like surfaces, ray tracing is the only sensible way to solve that problem. There's no real alternative. There are, however, much simpler solutions for bespoke cases, like the many games where you've seen like a water reflection or a single mirror, like a typical mirror, and that stuff, they can be handled just by rendering the scene again from a different perspective, usually at lower quality or some type of compromise to stop it being half the performance.
So is he talking about RTX right now?
Would
like
probably
the
consider
ray tracing
doing that,
stuff?
especially because it's quite simple, and for the mirror case, it's a nice, easy way to work. It does require just a little bit of constraint from the artist not to do like a hall of mirrors. They'd have to, you put a mirror in a bathroom, and ideally, when we've told art to test this in the past, they'll do it, and then behind the bathroom there'll be like a Bengal or something, and you're like, no, please put the mirror in a location.
It's why you can never give players a handheld mirror. It'll just become a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, you type of theoretically could, but you would just half the performance, literally, of the game. So, yeah. And the engine, although it would, you'd hope like a handheld mirror would be smaller, some parts of the engine will not be able to scale down. So like the number of pixels will be less, so that's great, you'll save on something. But there'll be certain aspects of the game will not scale down. So if it just gets to 1/10 for the screen size, doesn't mean it'll cost 10 times less. It might still only cost like 50% of this. So, who wants to take a 50% frame rate hit to have a handheld mirror? So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you played any racing games which have rear view mirrors, you'll always see the lower quality they get in the rear view mirrors, or they have such a bespoke engine to manage that, and that's like a core feature. Unfortunately, we've got an extremely complicated game before we consider mirrors. But yeah, so for small mirrors, like you'd probably just render the scene flipped. That is something we've been considering. There hasn't been a really strong need for it, but there is some needs from some departments asking for it. Which is all I'll say there. But but for when you get to the fully general case, like seeing your reflection in a spaceship for curved surface, ray tracing is the only real answer there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're going to use it?
There's a person named Dunky Aura in chat who just said all game devs are lazy.
True.
I've only
what
spent
a fucking
the better
Chad,
part of 8
dude.
years proving otherwise, but you do you.
What a Chad.
Will the
Is that
game
Reezer?
get realistic snow weather that is not identical to dust storms? For instance, the dust particles on Hurston appear to be the same as on Microtech with just a different color.
So 2 parts to the answer. One is I don't know if the dust particles are literally the same particles on the 2 examples you gave there, but they might be the same, they might be different. There is the tech there already for them to be different. We will have a system that type of quite complicated ground effect system. It's not strictly speaking weather, it's the wind kicking up whatever's on the ground. So if there's snow on the ground and there's a lot of wind, it will kick the snow up. We already have the ability to do different effects per, we call it surface type, each type of material on the ground. So that in effect could be done now. It's more of an asset VFX type question from the art teams. However, it's not, to get probably the real answer, it's not snow. It's snow being kicked up in a blizzard, basically. To get actually, strong winds, to get a full-on snow, full-on weather, that's something different. And it is on our
Snow
internal
doesn't
roadmap,
typically get kicked up.
And I think a lot of people are quite excited to get onto that.
Like
but
that.
I don't have a timeline I can share on that at the moment, but yeah, there will clearly, when we implement full-on weather, that will be a bespoke effect. Snow does not look like dust. It has a very specific look, and you'd expect rain.
It's very
and
rare
all
in
the
my
other types of weather,
experience,
hail
but
or whatever. So, yeah, it's on there. It will be coming one day, but not today.
All right. Before we let you go, we got to get into the buzzwords here. DLSS and FSR. Again, I'm reading the question from the backer here. This is planned for later on, but I believe in a Spectrum post, it was stated that we may be getting
I lived in New
DLSS
Jersey for
before
20 years.
FSR due to one
25
manufacturer's
years.
popularity over the other based on statistics. My question stems from one upscaling technology benefiting everyone, whereas the other benefiting only one party. There is actually no question. So they just want an update on DLSS and FSR and whether one will be coming before the other one and if it's based on popularity or something. I guess that's a question they actually forgot to
It
include
lifts
a
up, but
question.
not like a dust storm.
That's okay. I get a picture. So yeah, I mean those two technologies, they obviously aim to do a similar goal, but in the way they're implemented, they're completely different, and they have quite different performance, different quality, and different suitability to the engine and the problem you're trying to solve. And also how easy they are to integrate is quite different. They fit into different type of areas of the pipeline, and we have both of these techniques introduce a few complications to the engine, because particularly with the UI, because most games, there's my game world, upscale it, slap my UI on my 2D UI, and it says, how many bullets you've got or whatever, and you're going, and then job done. That's type of the frame. But our UI is largely in the world, and also we don't have one type of UI. We have so many types of UI. We have, the options menu, but then other than that, we have like mobiGlass, which is almost like a traditional UI, but it's not. It's still in the world. You can still see behind you people running up to you while using it. We have the holographic ship UI. We have the MFDs. We have a type of I can't remember all the different names you have them, but like things that are in the world, type of inner fort they call it. When you're going to talk to someone and it comes up with the options. There is so many different types of UI, and none of these play nicely with DLSS or FSR. So there's some work for us to figure out there. But yeah, as they mentioned, the market share isn't equal. One is currently stored in every GPU if they can afford a performance, and the other is on a much smaller percentage. I think 30%-ish might be type of the region you'd be looking at for DLSS at the moment. So yeah, for me, it's not really a question of A versus B. They're type of going to be considered independently on their own merits. Can we implement one? How long will it take? How do we implement it? But yeah, I can't pretend that market share, it's definitely a factor though. Like, if we have something that is going to benefit 99% of people or 100% of people, we want to implement that over something that benefits 10% of people. But on the other side, say we implemented one of them and it didn't give great results, we're under no obligation to implement that. And I don't want to pretend that we haven't, or us or any other company haven't implemented technology that is only benefiting a subset of the people. If we implement HDR, we talked about earlier, if you don't have a HDR monitor, tough luck. Ray tracing, don't have an RTX card or the latest AMD, tough luck. Optimizations for one CPU brand or the other, or face over IP. These are like many examples where it benefits a subset. Now, that's not great to be benefiting.
It's not
a subset,
ideal
but,
at all.
We wouldn't have any of them technologies or ever have any of them if we only tried to satisfy 100% of the people all the time. So it's more of a independent decision, bang for buck. I can see both of them being implemented. And probably the time to implement is probably the largest factor, to be honest.
Chat is currently... That's not the right scene. What is this? Hold on. I don't know. I hit the wrong scene. Hi,
I could hear Jared clicking that scene during his...
currently saying... It's the wrong button. That was the wrong button.
I could hear him clicking and making that scene during the whole fucking
and,
answer.
FSR is better, and they're getting pretty contentious there for a second. Do you want to jump in on the? You don't want to jump in on that.
I can't answer what is better or worse. I will leave that. I mean, that's technology.
Oh, never mind. That's Ali
clicking.
clicking.
Integrating it individually, so up to them. But what I will say is, DLSS has a distinct advantage in the way
that's Jared clicking.
Style, in that it is using more information that goes into it, so it has a better chance of giving a good result. FSR is intentionally takes less information in, so
This is the moment work from home needs to end. Okay? This is the moment that work from home needs to end. This is where it has gone too far. There's features being made for people at work from home. It's got to stop. We got to go back to work. Okay? We all got to go back to work. This is insane.
There's a limitation to what it can actually achieve. So there was a fundamental limitation there. Now, either of them could change tomorrow.
We've gone too far.
Two independent companies make their own decisions on how this technology works. But yeah, at the moment, it's more, the upper limit is higher for DLSS because of the inputs they take in. And that's a decision you just make. You have technology that can work different ways. We talked earlier about temporal solutions.
Baby.
If you use data from the previous frame, you have a much better chance of doing a good result. But you introduce a whole bunch of potential issues with ghosting, and you'll get one person that thinks that's a fair trade-off, and other people that think that that's not a good trade-off. So yeah, it's not as subjective what is better, but if you had a static camera, then having the more information of DLSS gives you a chance of giving a better image.
What game do you think Ali's
I'll leave
playing?
the public to decide what's
He's been clicking nonstop during the entire video.
Okay, let's get
playing
some
League?
last ones in. We're technically a little bit over time, but if your game, just a handful more here.
Sure.
Will we see HUD visibility improvements? This is
Two people
always
said cookie clicker, dude.
the perennial question. Current bodies like Gila, Crusader, etc. planets are nearly impossible to fight against during daylight because the terrain blows out the targeting info.
So yes, obviously we have the UI team would have their part to say on this as well, but we constantly hear from them, and actually spent a good time today talking about this issue with the UI team. It's not a trivial problem. We have things that are insanely bright in the game, where you're looking straight at the sun, and there's always a subjective nature as whether that should be blinding. It is incredibly bright.
I definitely think that should be blinding. Like, one of the
is
coolest things was when I was learning how to PvP for that tournament. Like, Noodle was telling me, always try and come from, if you're on the surface of the moon, you're always trying to come at them from the moon. Because it makes it harder for them to see. And then you could do the opposite, where if you know where the sun is, you can come at them from the sun and point down, and it blinds them. Like, you take certain routes to people to make it more difficult for them to aim. I think that's like legitimate strategy and is actually pretty good.
Is a factor in real life flight, but yeah, there is many times when it's not as legible as you'd want. So what we've done on our
it's
side,
illegible
we've
in
done quite
way
a
too
few
many
different shading
scenarios in
changes,
Star
which are
Citizen.
type of mostly done, but type of in the process of being brought into the UI pipeline to be used in the game. But these are things like adding drop shadows underneath text. We have ways, like you probably noticed when you use the mobiGlas, it darkens the scene and changes the exposure to give it a better chance of standing out. We have a new bloom and type of a drop shadow background blur effect that we can apply behind the UI to type of smudge out some of the details. And today we just got a request to type of also clip out extra bright details that are behind something. So say if somebody's got a torch or there's some particularly bright light just behind in front of you, then you bring up mobiGlas, we'll type of clip that type of extreme bright highlight out. But there's a type of lag where I'm not sure what that was. There's a lag from us implementing the shaders and then type of getting it into the engine and getting it into the actual assets on the UI team. So we've done quite a lot of work there, and they're looking to try and integrate some of that into the UI pipeline in the coming weeks, months. Yeah, it's definitely something they're actively talking about and improving.
Yeah. And folks may want to check out. It was just November or October. It was relatively recently. We did one of these QAs with Simon Bursey, the director of UI and stuff, and he asked the same question went to him, and you can see his answers. It's not the kind of thing that moves particularly fast or changes too much in 3 or 4 months. So the answers he gave you there will probably still be applicable today. So you can check out that Star Citizen Live from just a couple months ago. What graphical improvements
Red one,
coming
Jared,
are you
red one.
personally most excited about?
This probably won't be the answer everyone wants, but I just want frame rate. Frame rate's king for me. Until it's solid 60, it's no good. So yeah, for me it's frame rate. Once we're at solid 60, my interest will peak elsewhere. There is some areas of the engine visually that I certainly want to see improve vastly, but not before frame rate. That's the number one for me. I've had to pick a second.
You'll love to hear it.
Pique someone's interest.
You'll love to hear it.
our global illumination, our type of lighting system is lacking. That's probably the area that we are furthest behind over engines. Everything else is on a par or better than your average competitor, but our global illumination system is
Guys, a solid 60 is like for everybody, right? Like, I get above 60 now with my PC, so just stop laughing in chat because you're just being stupid and you're not listening to what the man's actually saying, okay? So, I already get 60 frames, so it's a matter of the unfortunate people that don't have good computers will get 60 frames, and then people who have high performance PCs will likely be able to push it higher.
not where we want it to be. So that would help the visuals and really help the art teams as well. So that's what I'd like to see.
Then we'll leave you with this last question: how do we get
your PC's
to
to chat,
60
exactly.
frames a second? What's the what's the magic bullet? Is there a magic bullet, or is it
You wouldn't complain about
50 other
60 on
smaller
a
things
bad
that all have to
PC.
happen in succession to get us there?
Sorry, this isn't Call of Duty.
Different
Like,
answer
this
for every
is
single person. Obviously, different machines. You know, some people might already be getting north of 60 FPS all the time. Some people will never hit 60 FPS at the moment. So, for me, it's three things. It's Gen 12 first. Once we finish Gen 12, which is our CPU optimizations, we shift our focus to GPU optimizations and the graphic settings to give people control over how their GPU is being used. And then after that, the one part that I have no control over is just the rest of the engine and the game code, which we talked about earlier when we talked about CNFL, the particularly challenging areas of the game where we get a ton of players or a city and whatever else on screen, or things like expo halls sometimes can be challenging. Like this is where where the other rest of the company will have to take they are taking their type of part of the problem on. But yeah, for our side, it's definitely just Gen 12, and then immediately after that, we'll hope to look at the GPU side of it. To give you some more flexibility there. Yeah.
Networking.
I mean, I really want to see 60 FPS after this. Especially, there will be situations, like I said, would be more troubling, but difficult. But I'm hoping a lot of the game, for most people, that's the target.
In addition to graphic stuff, there's networking stuff. There's the meshing. There's streaming. There's just optimizations in the actual
Here come
assets
the
themselves.
caveats.
There's further LOD development. It's everything. If there's one answer you take away for this question, folks, there is not one thing that will get us where we're going, and that's the truth for any game and on any platform, and especially true for one as big and
guys.
as
Anytime they do that,
as ours.
Peepo Talk.
It takes the
Peepo
work
Talk
of
is the emote.
almost every team.
I'm gonna get rid of
every
Yap.
aspect of Star
It's
System
Peepo
to
Talk.
get us where we're going, and that includes to our performance goals. So it will not be. I just want to disabuse anybody of the notion that there will be a magic day where we throw out a patch and it will just be whoop, and everything will be better. You will see, just like with Vulkan when we talked about it at the beginning of the show, it will be implementation after implementation after implementation after implementation that gets us where we're going, and then like getting used to cold or hot water, we'll just suddenly be there, and it'll be where we need it to be. So
one thing on that I was going to add is something I spoke about as
FF2. I just died at that
some
one.
of the Spectrum is that I would like to improve some of our type of debug stats you type of get for the backers, so they can type of understand their performance a little bit better. Because some points were CPU bound, and a better CPU or more cores or faster cores would be what you need, and at some point it's GPU. And I want to more clearly display that to the users, or the ones that are interested in that, so they can better understand why their frame rate is what it is, and whether there was anything they can do. And especially, obviously, if they're GPU bound, it does become fully under my control. Well, I guess art as well, obviously. They're producing the content and we're putting it on the screen, but ultimately, the graphics and rendering is under our control. So when you're GPU bound, the graphics options we provide you and how our technology works will be, that's all we need to get to 60. But if you're CPU bound, then it's a more complicated picture. Yeah, but we're hoping to inform people, because there is a lot of misinformation and confusion sometimes about the performance of the game, because it has changed so much and it has been difficult in stages. And yeah, I just want to clarify it for backers, like a no nonsense. This is where your frame rate's at. Hopefully that will help people understand and help them improve their frame rate as well, and see the improvements like as they come, so they can see their GPU time reducing, or the CPU, the cost of the rendering side of the GPU side, the rendering side of the CPU decreasing as we release Gen 12. Even if they happen to be in the Xenothread at that moment and still not getting maybe quite the frame rate they want.
All right, so that about wraps it up. Allie, thank you so much for taking the time
never
to be
heard
on the
the
show
thing.
This week. Specifically, again, like I did at the beginning, for coming to us and asking to do a show and asking to speak to the backers and share your information.
Yeah, that was actually really awesome.
If I'm allowed to speak on their behalf, I know that we all appreciate it.
Sure.
Some housekeeping stuff. Remember, Inside Star Citizen came out yesterday with looks at with a look at
think this is
refueling
what I'm looking for.
coming in the upcoming Alpha 317, as well as the hover quad. I have no idea when the hover quad comes out. Keep your eye on the robertspaceindustrials.com. I'm not involved in that stuff, so I don't know. I just make the videos. I do want to add. I saw some comments about the Christmas tree in Tom's background. He filmed that back in December. That's how long a lead time some of this stuff has. So don't give him too much crap. He doesn't still have his Christmas tree up. I asked. That was filmed back in December. So go easy on him. Heck, the refueling thing was filmed in November, so that's how far the lead in on those things go.
Yeah.
Next,
that's what I wanted to hear, was that the refueling thing was filmed in November. So how much further along is it than what we've seen?
This week, we've got an Oops All Sprint Report edition of Inside Star Citizen. We'll be checking out all kinds of aspects of Star Citizen development in next week's ISC. And then we'll be right back here on Friday with another Star Citizen Live. And I can't remember what it is or who's on it right now. So I'm bad at my job. Also, remember, Xenothreat is ongoing now. I believe it's moving into phase 2. If it hasn't already, it will soon. So check that out, as well as the This Month in Star Citizen posts on the robertspaceindustrials.com website, where there's all kinds of activities happening in the month of February, including Coramore and more. Coramore and more.
Allie's like, yep.
And then finally, last thing, I have not moved to the UK yet. I see some people, they're like, wow, did he build the same background? No, I am in a completely virtualized background. None of this is real. I'm actually still on vacation at Disney World. You were witnessing a simulacrum of disco. But I relocate to the UK in April after this current season of ISC is done. Well, we move in the hiatus, so so it'll all look different come April. Who knows what it'll be? It'll probably be me standing in the lobby of the new office with a bunch of paint buckets and ladders while they're still working on it. We'll see. So for Star Citizen Live, that's Allie Brown, Director of Graphics Engineering. I'm Jared Huckabee. I'm in charge of the sheep dip. And we'll see you next week, everybody. Take care.
The what? In charge of the what? That was good. I think just in general, somebody like excited about what they're doing and want to share it with the community is like the and answer questions from the community instead of answering them on Spectrum is the because those questions get buried a lot more than something like these do. Yeah, I think that's really cool and is like one of the cool positive things of the community. So Star Citizen Live, everybody. Yay.